A forgotten man and a tiny piece of technology were about to expose the most sophisticated criminal conspiracy in American political history. Picture this: a homeless guy clutching what looked like a broken phone charger turned out to be holding evidence that would bring down Chicago's most powerful politician and reveal an international money laundering network worth billions. The morning I first encountered Marcus Thorne under Roosevelt Bridge, I had no idea I was looking at the man who would trigger the largest federal corruption investigation in decades. What Marcus was protecting wasn't just local evidence of graft, it was documentation of how foreign criminal organizations had infiltrated American democracy at levels that would shock even seasoned federal investigators. You want to know how a single device could topple an entire political machine, right? This story starts with my morning coffee routine and ends with federal agents arresting dozens of officials in coordinated raids across multiple states. Every day for the past year, I walked past the homeless encampment under Roosevelt Bridge on my way to Channel 7 News. Marcus Thorne, maybe 55 with graying hair, that suggested better times always occupied the same spot against the concrete support pillar. Most pedestrians crossed the street to avoid him, but something about how he protected that small digital device caught my attention as an investigative journalist. He guarded it like the Hope Diamond, never letting it leave his immediate proximity even during sleep. Our first conversation revealed immediately that Marcus was unlike any homeless person I had previously encountered in my reporting career. When I offered him breakfast leftovers, he thanked me with vocabulary and grammar that belonged in a university lecture hall rather than a street corner. Most people experiencing homelessness communicate in fragments or focus solely on immediate survival needs, but Marcus discussed municipal politics with the precision of someone who understood government operations from the inside. He knew specific details about city budget allocations that escaped most reporters could reference particular ordinance numbers without notes, and offered analysis of bond ratings that would impress financial professionals. What captured my investigative instincts was Marcus's physical reaction whenever police vehicles appeared in the area. His entire demeanor would shift, instantly, shoulders tensing, as he quickly concealed the mysterious device deeper into his jacket pocket. During one rainy morning, when I brought hot coffee, I noticed slight tremors in his hands that had nothing to do with temperature or withdrawal symptoms. This was fear in its purest form, the kind that comes from knowing your life depends on staying invisible. When I asked about his obvious anxiety, Marcus glanced around carefully, before leaning closer and whispering words that ignited my journalist curiosity. He claimed his device contained information that could send powerful people to federal prison for decades. Initially, I assumed Marcus was experiencing mental health issues with grandiose delusions, until he began providing specific names, dates, and financial figures that perfectly matched corruption stories I had been investigating for months. He knew intricate details about the controversial waterfront development that had bypassed normal approval processes, despite community opposition. Marcus mentioned offshore banking connections to construction contracts, private meetings between Mayor Vincent Castellanos and developers that were supposed to be confidential, and real estate transactions that occurred weeks before public announcements. Every fact he shared proved accurate when I researched it independently, which was impossible unless he possessed genuine insider access. The breakthrough moment came 3 weeks into our relationship when Marcus accidentally dropped his device while reaching for food I had brought. As it struck the concrete, the screen illuminated briefly, and I glimpsed what appeared to be financial spreadsheets, displaying millions of dollars in transactions. Before I could examine it closely, Marcus retrieved it with desperation that told me his survival depended on keeping that information secret. The terror in his expression confirmed this wasn't paranoid fantasy, this was someone sitting on evidence that could destroy Chicago's entire political establishment. That evening I couldn't sleep, thinking about what Marcus might be hiding, and why he seemed to trust me with hints about its contents. As an investigative reporter who had spent years trying to expose municipal corruption, I recognized I was potentially looking at the story that would define my career. However, I also understood that if Marcus was truthful about his device's contents, then his life was almost certainly in immediate danger. The next morning, when I arrived at his usual location, I discovered something that validated my worst concerns. Marcus had vanished, but his few possessions were scattered around the area as if someone had searched through them looking for something specific. What happened next convinced me that Marcus Thorne was not just another mentally ill person with conspiracy theories about government corruption. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number and heard Marcus speaking in hushed, panicked tones from what sounded like a public payphone. He explained that he had been forced to relocate because 2 well-dressed men had been asking questions about him around the encampment. They had identified themselves as social workers, but Marcus recognized one as Vincent Castellanos' chief of staff, whose photograph regularly appeared in society pages alongside Chicago's political elite. Marcus begged me to meet him at Millennium Park after sunset, saying he needed to show me something that would fundamentally change my understanding of how Chicago actually operated behind its public facade. The urgency in his voice convinced me this transcended simple municipal corruption. This involved something that reached into the core of how power and money moved through one of America's largest cities. As I ended the call, I realized I was about to become part of a story that would either establish my reputation as a serious investigative journalist or put my life in serious jeopardy. But I had no conception of what Marcus would reveal to me about Mayor Vincent Castellanos and the true scope of the criminal network operating within Chicago's government. The evidence stored on that device would prove that the city's most beloved public figure had been facilitating the largest money laundering operation in the Midwest, using infrastructure projects to clean hundreds of millions in proceeds from international drug trafficking and organized crime. The documentation Marcus had collected included not just financial records, but video footage of criminal meetings and recorded conversations that would implicate dozens of politicians, judges, and business leaders in a conspiracy that extended far beyond Chicago's borders. The question that kept me awake was both simple and terrifying. If Marcus possessed all this incriminating evidence, why hadn't he taken it to federal authorities years earlier? And what exactly had happened to make him trust a random television reporter with information that could easily get both of us killed? Little did I know that the answer to that question would reveal a personal betrayal so profound that it would test everything Marcus believed about friendship, family, and the possibility of redemption for people who had chosen the wrong path. The meeting at Millennium Park that night changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty, desperation, and how good people can be manipulated into becoming criminals. When I arrived near Crown Fountain, Marcus was already waiting on a bench, his device pressed against his chest like armor against an invisible enemy. 3 days of running had transformed him from a careful homeless man into someone who looked genuinely hunted, his eyes constantly scanning shadows for threats that could emerge from any direction. What he told me about his connection to Vincent Castellanos revealed the tragic foundation of Chicago's corruption crisis and explained why exposing the truth would require destroying the most important friendship of his life. Marcus looked directly at me and spoke words that made my blood freeze. Vincent Castellanos was not just the mayor he was investigating, but his former roommate and closest friend from Northwestern University. They had shared an apartment for 3 years during law school, dreamed together about reforming Chicago politics, and Marcus had served as best man at Vincent's wedding in 1999. The device Marcus protected contained documentation of how his closest friend had transformed from idealistic public servant into the coordinator of an international money laundering operation worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. The corruption had begun 4 years earlier with what appeared to be every parent's worst nightmare. Vincent's 19-year-old daughter Sophia disappeared during a family vacation in Mexico. The public story was that Sophia had decided to extend her stay to study Spanish at a local university, but the reality was far more sinister. She had been kidnapped by a criminal organization called Los Hermanos, who demanded $50 million in ransom for her safe return. Vincent was desperate, terrified, and completely unprepared for negotiations with international criminals, who made it clear that any law enforcement involvement would result in Sophia's immediate execution. Marcus described the night Vincent came to his apartment, breaking down completely while begging for help, accessing emergency city funds that could be used to pay the ransom. Vincent had exhausted every legal option from FBI negotiators to private security firms, but Los Hermanos insisted that only immediate payment through untraceable channels would save Sophia's life. Marcus agreed to design a temporary system for moving the money through Chicago's infrastructure budget, believing they would use it once to rescue Sophia and then immediately return the funds before anyone discovered they were missing. After Sophia's safe return to Chicago, Los Hermanos contacted Vincent with a proposition that would change his life forever. They had been impressed by how efficiently he could transfer large sums through legitimate government channels without triggering federal oversight or raising suspicions among city council members. The cartel offered Vincent a simple choice: continue working with them as their American money laundering coordinator, or watch Sophia disappear permanently while having their ransom payment exposed to federal investigators who would destroy his political career and send him to prison. Vincent's transformation from victim to willing participant happened gradually over months as the amounts of criminal money flowing through Chicago infrastructure projects grew from thousands to millions of dollars. Marcus watched his best friend rationalize each escalation, telling himself he was protecting Sophia while serving the greater good, by bringing development money into the city. Vincent started with small amounts hidden in park renovation contracts and road repair budgets, but Los Hermanos had connections to drug trafficking operations across the entire Midwest and needed to clean enormous sums through legitimate business transactions. The device Marcus carried contained 3 years of recorded evidence documenting every step of Vincent's descent into criminality. Marcus had installed monitoring software on city servers, initially hoping to gather proof that would allow them to safely escape from cartel control. Instead, he discovered that Vincent was no longer looking for exit strategies, but was actively expanding the money laundering operation and recruiting other officials to participate in what had become a sophisticated criminal enterprise, spanning multiple states. Marcus made his decision to collect evidence when he realized Vincent was planning something that would extend their criminal activities far beyond municipal corruption. 6 months ago, Vincent had announced his intention to run for governor of Illinois, not because he wanted to serve the public, but because he needed access to state infrastructure budgets worth hundreds of billions of dollars over a four-year term. The recordings revealed Vincent's plan to install criminal operatives in key state positions, creating a network that could control law enforcement investigations and judicial proceedings throughout Illinois. But what horrified Marcus most was discovering that Vincent's corruption had expanded beyond simple money laundering for Los Hermanos. His friend was now facilitating financial transactions for multiple criminal organizations, turning Chicago into a central hub for dirty money from drug cartels, human trafficking rings, and weapons dealers operating across North America. The evidence showed that Vincent had been coordinating with similar networks in Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and other major cities, building alliances that would make Chicago the nerve center for criminal finance throughout the region. The breaking point came when Marcus discovered that Vincent had been lying about Sophia's current situation and location. Through his monitoring of Vincent's private communications, Marcus learned that Sophia was not living safely in Chicago, as everyone believed, but was actually in Mexico working directly with Los Hermanos leadership. She had not been an innocent victim of kidnapping, but had voluntarily joined the criminal organization and was now serving as their liaison with American political figures. Vincent knew about Sophia's voluntary participation, but continued using her supposed victimhood to justify his increasingly criminal behavior. This revelation forced Marcus to confront the possibility that his closest friend had become someone completely different from the idealistic young man he had known in college. The Vincent Castellanos, who now held the mayor's office, was willing to sacrifice democratic institutions and public trust to protect a daughter who had chosen to become a criminal herself. Marcus realized that saving his friend would require destroying him, because Vincent's crimes had grown far beyond anything that could be ignored or forgiven through private intervention. As we sat in that dark park, I understood that Marcus was carrying more than just evidence of municipal corruption. He was documenting the systematic infiltration of American political institutions by international criminal organizations who used emotional manipulation and family loyalty to transform public servants into willing participants in their operations. The device he protected represented proof that democracy itself was under attack by sophisticated criminals who understood that corrupting officials was more effective than simply opposing them. The question haunting both of us was whether Marcus could bring himself to destroy his closest friend's life and family, even knowing that Vincent's crimes were expanding into areas that threatened national security. More importantly, we had to survive long enough to get this evidence to people who could act on it, because Marcus had just revealed that Vincent and Los Hermanos knew about his investigation and were actively hunting him with resources that included corrupt police officers, private security contractors, and cartel assassins specialized in eliminating problems permanently. 3 days after Marcus revealed his friendship with Vincent Castellanos, I thought I understood the full scope of what we were dealing with, but I was completely wrong. What seemed like a story about municipal corruption and cartel money laundering was actually just the visible surface of a criminal network, so sophisticated it challenged everything I believed about American democracy. When Marcus finally agreed to show me the complete contents of his device, the evidence revealed a conspiracy that extended far beyond Chicago and involved the systematic infiltration of government institutions across multiple states. The data painted a picture of organized crime that made our local corruption look like amateur hour. The device contained automatically recorded financial transactions, showing that Chicago had become the central processing hub for criminal money from organizations operating throughout the Great Lakes region. Marcus had programmed monitoring software to capture communications, mentioning specific keywords, and the resulting database included thousands of pieces of evidence documenting how dirty money moved through legitimate government channels. The total volume of criminal proceeds being cleaned through infrastructure projects had reached nearly $200 billion annually, making it one of the largest money laundering operations in world history. But the financial scope was only part of what made this network dangerous to American political institutions. The recordings revealed that Vincent's ambition extended far beyond serving as mayor of Chicago. He was planning to use his gubernatorial campaign as a stepping stone toward controlling federal infrastructure spending across the entire Midwest. His strategy involved placing criminal operatives in key state positions, including Attorney General, State Police Chief, and Transportation Director, creating a shadow government that could influence federal investigations and interstate commerce regulations. The timeline for this expansion had accelerated because Vincent had learned that federal investigators were conducting a parallel investigation into Chicago's suspicious financial activities. Instead of reducing his criminal involvement, Vincent was rushing to gain political immunity before law enforcement could build a prosecutable case. The gubernatorial election was scheduled for next Tuesday, giving us exactly 5 days to expose the network before Vincent obtained executive protection and the power to shut down any investigation into his activities. This urgency explained why Marcus had abandoned his normal life 6 months earlier and chosen to live on the streets as a way to disappear from the surveillance network that Vincent and Los Hermanos had established around anyone with knowledge of their operations. 12 other city employees, contractors, and journalists who had asked inconvenient questions about financial irregularities had died in accidents, suicides, and random crimes that left no evidence connecting their deaths to the corruption and investigation. Marcus had realized that homelessness provided the perfect cover for continuing his evidence collection while avoiding the fate of those who had posed threats to the network. During our third meeting, Marcus introduced me to Jake Morrison, a former Chicago Tribune investigative reporter who had lost his career 2 years earlier after getting too close to exposing similar financial irregularities. Jake had been systematically destroyed when Vincent's associates successfully framed him for accepting bribes from construction contractors, leading to his firing and blacklisting from major news organizations. He now worked as a freelance journalist, living in a studio apartment while pursuing the story that had cost him everything he had worked to achieve. Jake brought crucial external perspective to our investigation because he had been tracking the network's activities from outside city government, following paper trails through federal databases and corporate records that revealed connections to similar operations in Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Minneapolis. His research showed that Chicago was not an isolated case, but the central node in a criminal network that had been systematically infiltrating municipal governments across the Great Lakes region for 5 years. The pattern was always the same: recruit officials through emotional manipulation, expand their criminal involvement gradually, and use their political positions to facilitate money laundering for multiple criminal organizations. Jake had documented 47 officials across 6 states who appeared to be participating in money laundering activities, and his analysis suggested that most had been coerced into cooperation rather than choosing criminality voluntarily. This pattern made Vincent's situation more complex because it raised questions about whether he was truly a villain or another victim of a system designed to trap well-meaning public servants in impossible situations. The evidence suggested that once officials became involved with Los Hermanos, they found escape virtually impossible because the criminal organization used family threats and blackmail to ensure continued cooperation. Marcus made a critical error when he decided our next step should be attempting to convince Vincent to surrender voluntarily and cooperate with federal investigators. Despite everything he had learned about his friend's transformation, Marcus still believed Vincent's core personality remained intact, and that their friendship could persuade him to choose redemption over continued criminality. This miscalculation nearly cost all 3 of us our lives, because Marcus underestimated how completely Vincent's decision-making had been compromised by years of criminal involvement and constant fear for Sophia's safety. Jake strongly opposed Marcus's plan to approach Vincent, directly arguing that we should focus on getting evidence to federal investigators and allowing trained professionals to handle confrontation with someone who had demonstrated willingness to eliminate threats to his operation. But Marcus was convinced that his personal relationship with Vincent provided unique leverage that could result in peaceful resolution, where Vincent's cooperation would help expose the broader network while protecting Sophia and other family members from criminal retaliation. The debate between Marcus and Jake revealed fundamental disagreement about whether Vincent was still capable of making moral choices or had become so thoroughly corrupted that he represented immediate danger to anyone who opposed his interests. This question became urgent when Jake discovered that Los Hermanos was planning a major elimination operation designed to remove all potential witnesses and evidence related to their Chicago activities. The operation was scheduled to begin immediately after the gubernatorial election, regardless of whether Vincent won or lost, because the criminal organization had decided their Chicago network had become too exposed to continue operating safely. Jake's surveillance revealed that this elimination operation included not just Marcus and other potential witnesses, but also Vincent's own family members, who knew too much about his criminal activities. Los Hermanos had apparently concluded that Vincent himself had become a liability because of his political visibility and growing ambition, and they were planning to eliminate him along with everyone else who could connect them to the money laundering network. Even Sophia, despite her apparent cooperation with the criminal organization, was targeted for elimination because her knowledge made her a potential witness if she ever decided to cooperate with law enforcement. The revelation that Vincent and Sophia were also marked for death changed our situation completely, because it meant that exposing the network might actually save Vincent's life rather than destroying it. However, it also meant we had less than 72 hours to contact federal investigators, coordinate protection for potential witnesses, and somehow survive long enough to see justice accomplished. The criminal organization we were opposing had successfully operated in plain sight for years, while eliminating anyone who threatened their interests, and we were 3 people with limited resources and no law enforcement training. Then Marcus's phone rang with a call that would shatter every assumption we had made about the network's leadership structure and our chances of survival, because the voice belonged to someone we thought was a victim, and what she told Marcus revealed that we had been walking into a trap from the very beginning. The phone call from Sofia Castellanos lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds, but those words shattered every assumption we had made about who was controlling Chicago's criminal network. When Marcus answered his encrypted phone that Wednesday evening, Sophia's voice came through with cold professional clarity that immediately told us she was not the victim we believed her to be. She didn't waste time with explanations or threats. Instead, she simply informed Marcus that his investigation had been monitored from the beginning, and that his device contained exactly the information she had wanted federal investigators to find. Sophia's next move proved she had been orchestrating events far more sophisticated than any of us had imagined. While speaking to Marcus, she simultaneously sent him a video file that began playing automatically on his device screen, where Jake and I could watch. The footage showed Sophia in what appeared to be a luxury penthouse, calmly reviewing financial documents while giving instructions to several men in expensive suits. The timestamp indicated the video had been recorded just hours earlier, and Sophia's composed demeanor made it clear she was not being held against her will, but was directing operations with complete authority. The most shocking moment came when the video showed Sophia reviewing surveillance footage of our meetings in Millennium Park, proving that our supposedly secret investigation had been under observation from the very beginning. She had been watching us watch her father collecting information about our methods and federal contacts, while feeding us carefully selected evidence through Marcus's device. The realization that we had been manipulated for months was devastating, but what came next revealed the true scope of Sophia's criminal genius. Sophia had staged her own kidnapping 4 years earlier, not as a cry for help, but as a recruitment strategy designed to gain her father's cooperation in establishing an American money laundering network. The video showed her planning sessions with Elena Vasquez, the notorious cartel leader we thought was her captor, revealing that they were actually business partners who had identified Chicago as the ideal location for infiltrating American political institutions. Sophia's supposed victimhood had been a performance designed to exploit her father's love, while providing Los Hermanos with access to municipal budgets and political connections. Jake immediately began recording our conversation, while Sophia continued explaining her strategy with chilling, matter-of-fact delivery. She revealed that Vincent had never been in actual control of the money laundering operation, despite believing he was making independent decisions about its expansion and management. Every choice Vincent thought he had made, from selecting specific infrastructure projects to recruiting additional officials, had been suggested or manipulated by Sophia through carefully orchestrated family conversations that played on his guilt about her supposed kidnapping. The evidence Marcus had been collecting for 3 years was not the smoking gun we believed it to be, but a sophisticated misinformation campaign designed to misdirect federal investigators toward Los Hermanos while protecting Sophia's role as the network's primary coordinator. She had anticipated that someone like Marcus would eventually attempt to document Vincent's activities, so she had prepared his device to contain enough authentic information to be credible, while including deliberate false leads that would waste law enforcement resources pursuing the wrong targets. Sophia's revelation forced us to completely reevaluate everything we thought we understood about the criminal network and our chances of exposing it successfully. The financial transactions, recorded conversations, and operational details we had been analyzing were all contaminated by her deliberate deception, which meant our investigation had been building toward conclusions that served her interests rather than justice. Jake's independent research suddenly became our most valuable asset because it had been conducted outside Sophia's sphere of influence and manipulation. But Sophia had made one critical miscalculation in her strategic planning. She had underestimated Jake's connections within federal law enforcement and his ability to verify information through sources she could not monitor or control. While Sophia had been manipulating Marcus's device and feeding us selected evidence, Jake had been communicating independently with FBI agents who were conducting their own investigation into international money laundering networks. His external verification of financial patterns had provided federal investigators with intelligence that Sophia could not contaminate or redirect. This FBI connection became our lifeline when Special Agent Sarah Chen contacted Jake directly and revealed that federal investigators had been tracking the Chicago network for 18 months, using methods that did not depend on Marcus's compromised evidence. Agent Chen explained that they had been waiting for additional proof to complete their RICO case, and that Sophia's phone call to Marcus was actually being monitored by federal surveillance teams who now had direct evidence of her criminal leadership role. Agent Chen's most important revelation was that the FBI had identified Sophia as a person of interest months earlier, rather than accepting her public image as a kidnapping victim. Federal investigators had been tracking her communications with Elena Vasquez and documenting her role in establishing similar networks in other American cities. The phone call we had just received provided the final piece of evidence federal prosecutors needed to charge Sophia with conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering under federal statutes that carried life sentences. The protection offered by FBI involvement came with serious conditions, because Agent Chen explained that their operation required us to continue acting as if we were unaware of federal surveillance, while they gathered final evidence needed for coordinated arrests. We would need to maintain our investigation while federal agents used us as unwitting bait to draw out additional criminal activity and identify all network participants before making arrests. This strategy would place us in extreme danger, but it offered the only realistic chance of dismantling the entire organization rather than just arresting individual participants. Jake's journalistic experience made him comfortable with calculated risks, but Marcus struggled with learning that his 3-year investigation had been manipulated from the beginning and that his best friend would be arrested, regardless of whether he chose cooperation or resistance. The evidence against Vincent was already sufficient for federal prosecution, and his testimony would only influence sentencing rather than determining guilt. This knowledge forced Marcus to accept that their friendship had been built on deception, and that saving Vincent's life might be the only meaningful gesture he could offer. The plan Agent Chen proposed required precise coordination between our civilian activities and federal law enforcement operations because they needed us to document Sophia's criminal leadership while avoiding actions that would trigger the elimination operation before agents were ready for arrests. We had 48 hours to gather additional evidence about Sophia's role while helping federal agents identify locations where criminal meetings were taking place and financial transactions were being processed. Sophia's final mistake was assuming that her psychological manipulation had been so successful that we would be paralyzed by confusion and fear rather than adapting our strategy to account for her deception. She had revealed herself too early because she wanted to savor our defeat, but her premature disclosure gave federal agents the opportunity they needed to move against her network before she could complete her planned elimination of witnesses and evidence. The hunter had become the hunted, and Sophia's overconfidence would be her downfall. But as we prepared to implement our new strategy with federal support, Marcus received another call that revealed Sophia had one final manipulation prepared, and this one involved his family in ways that would test everything he believed about sacrifice, loyalty, and the price of seeking justice against people who had no moral boundaries in their pursuit of power and wealth. The second call from Sophia came at dawn Thursday morning, and changed everything we understood about Marcus's personal stakes in exposing her criminal network. When Marcus answered his phone, Sophia's voice carried a different tone than before, one that suggested she was preparing to deploy her most devastating psychological weapon. She calmly informed Marcus that his wife Linda and son Tommy were not estranged from him by choice as he believed, but had been under her protection for the past 18 months in a safe house outside Chicago where they believed Marcus had abandoned them to pursue his dangerous investigation. Sophia's manipulation of Marcus's family situation was more sophisticated than simple kidnapping or coercion. She had convinced Linda and Tommy that Marcus himself was the criminal they needed protection from. Using fabricated evidence and carefully edited recordings, Sophia had portrayed Marcus as a corrupt city official who was stealing money through the same infrastructure projects that were being used for money laundering. Linda and Tommy genuinely believed that Marcus had become dangerous and that Sophia was helping them hide from his criminal associates who might harm them to prevent testimony against his activities. This revelation devastated Marcus because it meant that any attempt to reunite with his family would require convincing them that everything they believed about his character and their circumstances was carefully constructed deception. Sophia had not just separated Marcus from his loved ones, she had turned them against him psychologically, while making herself appear to be their protector and savior. The cruelty of this manipulation was that Marcus's family would resist rescue attempts and would view federal agents as threats rather than salvation. Jake immediately recognized this as Sophia's most dangerous gambit, because it created a situation where saving Marcus's family would require exposing them to the truth about their protector in ways that could psychologically devastate them. Linda and Tommy had spent 18 months believing they were hiding from Marcus, rather than being hidden from him, and learning that their supposed protector was actually an international criminal would shatter their ability to trust their own judgment about people and situations. But Sophia had made a critical error by revealing her control over Marcus's family too early, because Agent Chen and her FBI team were monitoring the conversation and now had direct evidence of kidnapping and psychological manipulation that violated federal statutes carrying severe penalties. Sophia's admission that she had been controlling Marcus's family while manipulating their beliefs about his character provided federal prosecutors with additional charges that would ensure life sentences, even if other aspects of their money laundering case encountered legal challenges. Agent Chen immediately activated a rescue operation designed to locate and secure Marcus's family while gathering evidence about the safe house where they were being held. The FBI team had been tracking several properties connected to Sophia's network, and her phone call provided crucial information that allowed them to narrow their search to specific locations where Linda and Tommy were most likely being held. The challenge would be approaching them carefully because they would view federal agents as enemies rather than rescuers. Marcus made the painful decision to participate in his family's rescue operation, despite knowing that his presence might initially terrify them rather than providing comfort. Agent Chen explained that federal psychologists would be present to help Linda and Tommy understand the truth about their situation, but Marcus would need to be prepared for the possibility that rebuilding relationships with his family would require months or years of patient work to overcome the psychological damage Sophia had inflicted. The rescue operation took place Thursday afternoon at a luxury apartment complex in Evanston that Sophia's organization had been using as a safe house for family members of officials who were participating in the money laundering network. FBI agents found Linda and Tommy living in comfortable conditions, but under constant supervision by handlers who had convinced them they were being protected from Marcus rather than being held captive. The psychological manipulation had been so thorough that Linda initially refused to believe federal agents who tried to explain the truth about Sophia's criminal activities. Tommy's reaction was more complex because at 17 he had begun questioning some of the stories he had been told about his father's supposed criminal behavior. His natural skepticism had made him less susceptible to Sophia's manipulation, and when federal agents showed him authentic evidence about Marcus's investigation, he was able to recognize the truth more quickly than his mother. Tommy's acceptance of the facts about Sophia's deception became crucial in helping Linda understand that they had been victims rather than protected witnesses. The reunion between Marcus and his family was emotionally devastating because it forced all three of them to confront how completely Sophia had manipulated their relationships and perceptions of each other. Linda's initial fear of Marcus gradually gave way to anger at Sophia for the psychological torture she had endured, while Tommy expressed guilt about believing the lies he had been told about his father's character. The healing process would be long and difficult, but Agent Chen's team included specialists who could help families recover from this type of criminal manipulation. Sophia's response to losing control over Marcus's family was swift and deadly, because she immediately activated the elimination operation she had been planning for the period after the gubernatorial election. Instead of waiting until Tuesday as originally scheduled, she began coordinating attacks against potential witnesses and federal agents while simultaneously preparing her escape from Chicago with Elena Vasquez and hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen money. Jake's media contacts became crucial at this moment because he activated the comprehensive story he had been preparing about the entire criminal network, releasing evidence simultaneously across multiple news platforms to ensure that Sophia's crimes would be exposed, even if she succeeded in eliminating individual witnesses. The media strategy created a situation where Sophia's best option for survival required abandoning her elimination operation and focusing entirely on escape before federal agents could close off her exit routes. But Sophia had prepared one final manipulation that would either ensure her freedom or destroy everyone who had opposed her criminal enterprise. She contacted Marcus directly and revealed that the apartment building where his family had been held was not just a safe house, but was also being used as a base of operations for coordinating attacks against federal agents and potential witnesses across the Chicago area. The building contained enough explosive devices to kill everyone inside and destroy evidence that could be used to prosecute other network participants. Sophia's ultimatum was simple but devastating. Marcus could choose to save the residents of the apartment building by warning federal agents about the explosives, but doing so would alert Sophia to the timing of federal operations and allow her to escape before arrests could be made. Alternatively, he could remain silent and allow federal agents to proceed with their coordinated raids, but innocent people would die when Sophia triggered the explosives as her final act of revenge against those who had exposed her criminal empire. The choice Sophia offered Marcus represented the ultimate test of his moral character, because there was no option that would prevent loss of life while ensuring justice was achieved. Federal agents had 40 minutes to make a decision about whether to prioritize saving innocent lives or completing their mission to arrest Sophia and Elena before they could disappear with stolen money and establish new criminal networks in other locations. Marcus's decision would determine not just the outcome of the federal investigation, but also whether Sophia's psychological manipulation would achieve its final goal of forcing him to choose between justice and humanity in ways that would haunt him for the rest of his life, regardless of which option he selected. Marcus made his choice in 37 minutes, but those 37 minutes felt like hours as we watched him wrestle with the impossible decision Sophia had forced upon him. Agent Chen had evacuated federal teams from the apartment building, while bomb disposal experts confirmed that Sophia had indeed planted explosive devices throughout the structure, enough to bring down several floors and kill dozens of innocent residents. Marcus's decision to warn federal agents about the explosives meant that Sophia would escape, but it also saved the lives of 43 people who had no connection to the criminal network, beyond living in a building that Sophia had converted into her base of operations. Sophia's escape from Chicago was swift and professionally executed, but she had underestimated how much evidence federal agents had already gathered during their 18-month investigation. Within hours of her departure, Agent Chen's team had arrested Vincent Castellanos, Elena Vasquez, and 34 other network participants in coordinated raids across 5 states. The money laundering operation was effectively dismantled, even though its primary architect had evaded immediate capture and federal agents had frozen over $200 million in criminal assets that would be returned to the municipal budgets from which they had been stolen. Jake's media strategy proved crucial during this final phase because his comprehensive story about the criminal network was published simultaneously across multiple news platforms, ensuring that public attention remained focused on the corruption scandal even as Sophia disappeared. The live coverage of arrests and asset seizures created a media firestorm that made it impossible for other network participants to claim ignorance about the criminal conspiracy, and several additional officials surrendered voluntarily rather than face the inevitability of federal prosecution. Vincent's arrest at his campaign headquarters was broadcast live on national television, providing a dramatic conclusion to his political career and his friendship with Marcus. The man who had once dreamed of reforming Chicago politics was led away in handcuffs, while reporters shouted questions about his daughter's role in the criminal network and his plans for the gubernatorial election that would no longer take place. Vincent's transformation from idealistic public servant to criminal puppet was complete, but his cooperation with federal investigators would at least ensure that other victims of Sophia's manipulation received some measure of justice. The most shocking arrest was Elena Vasquez, who was captured at O'Hare International Airport while attempting to board a private jet bound for Mexico. Federal agents had been tracking her movements through surveillance technology that Sophia was unaware of, and Elena's attempt to flee provided additional evidence of the criminal conspiracy's international scope. Her laptop contained financial records and communication logs that implicated dozens of additional participants in money laundering operations, spanning 3 countries. Marcus's reunion with his family took place in a federal safe house, where they could begin the long process of healing from Sophia's psychological manipulation while remaining under protection from any remaining criminal associates who might seek revenge. Linda's acceptance of the truth about Marcus's investigation and Sophia's deception was gradual and painful, but Tommy's support helped her understand that their 18-month separation had been based on carefully constructed lies rather than Marcus's actual choices or character. The immediate aftermath of the federal raids revealed the full scope of Sophia's criminal network and its impact on American political institutions. Federal investigators had documented money laundering activities in 17 cities, with total criminal proceeds exceeding $800 billion over 5 years. The network had corrupted municipal governments across the Great Lakes region while facilitating drug trafficking, human trafficking, and weapons smuggling operations that extended from Mexico to Canada. Agent Chen's investigation had also uncovered evidence that Sophia and Elena had been planning to expand their operations to the federal level by targeting congressional representatives and federal judges who could provide protection for their criminal activities. The governor's race in Illinois had been just the first step in a long-term strategy designed to infiltrate American government institutions at every level, from municipal councils to the United States Senate. But Sophia's most devastating legacy was the psychological damage she had inflicted on the families of officials who had been forced to participate in her network. Federal agents identified 23 families who had been separated through manipulation, similar to what Marcus had experienced with children and spouses, convinced that their loved ones had become criminals when they were actually victims of coercion. The healing process for these families would require years of therapy and support services that federal victim assistance programs were not equipped to provide. Jake's continuing investigation revealed that Sophia's network was not unique, but represented a new model for international criminal organizations seeking to infiltrate democratic institutions through emotional manipulation rather than traditional corruption. Similar networks were being investigated in Phoenix, Seattle, and Miami, suggesting that Sophia's methods had been copied by other criminal groups who recognized the effectiveness of psychological warfare against public officials, their families. The federal prosecution of network participants became one of the largest RICO cases in American legal history, with over 100 defendants facing charges, ranging from money laundering to conspiracy to commit murder. Vincent's cooperation provided crucial testimony that helped secure convictions against dozens of other officials. But his own sentence of 12 years in federal prison reflected the serious nature of his crimes despite the mitigating circumstances of Sophia's manipulation. Marcus's role as the primary whistleblower in the case made him a target for retaliation from criminal associates who had escaped arrest, but it also established him as a crucial resource for federal investigators working to prevent similar infiltration of American political institutions. Agent Chen offered him a position as a special consultant with the FBI, recognizing that his unique experience and technical expertise could help other investigations identify and expose criminal networks before they became fully established. The search for Sophia Castellanos continued across international boundaries as federal agents worked with law enforcement agencies in Mexico, Canada, and several European countries where she might attempt to establish new operations. Her psychological manipulation techniques had proven so effective that she represented a genuine threat to democratic institutions worldwide, and her capture had become a priority for international law enforcement cooperation. 6 months after her escape from Chicago, Sophia was still at large, despite a global manhunt that had frozen her financial assets and eliminated her known associates. But Marcus had provided federal investigators with enough evidence to ensure that her criminal network could never be rebuilt, and her methods had been documented thoroughly enough to help other potential victims recognize and resist similar manipulation in the future. The question that haunted everyone involved in the investigation was whether Sophia would attempt to establish new criminal operations in other countries, or whether her escape from Chicago represented the end of her criminal career and the beginning of a life spent avoiding capture by law enforcement agencies around the world. 8 months after Sophia Castellanos disappeared into the international criminal underground, I watched Marcus Thorne testify before a joint congressional committee about preventing the infiltration of American democratic institutions by sophisticated criminal organizations. The man who had once lived under Roosevelt Bridge as a forgotten homeless person now sat at a witness table in the Capitol building, providing lawmakers with detailed recommendations for protecting municipal governments from the kind of psychological manipulation that had nearly destroyed Chicago. His transformation from victim to hero was complete, but the careful way he spoke about trust and betrayal revealed that some wounds from his ordeal would never fully heal. Marcus's testimony became the foundation for the most comprehensive municipal reform legislation in modern American history. The Marcus Thorne Act, passed by overwhelming bipartisan majorities in both houses of Congress, required all municipal governments receiving federal funding to implement real-time financial reporting systems that would make money laundering impossible to conceal for extended periods. The legislation also established federal task forces dedicated to identifying and investigating suspicious financial patterns in local government operations, with resources to provide protection for whistleblowers who reported corruption. The personal cost of Marcus's heroism had been enormous, but his family had found ways to heal from Sophia's psychological manipulation through months of therapy and patient reconstruction of their relationships. Linda had returned to work as a municipal budget analyst with a new understanding of how criminal organizations could exploit legitimate government operations, and her insights had helped other cities identify vulnerabilities in their financial oversight systems. Tommy, now 18 and preparing for college, had become an advocate for families affected by criminal manipulation, speaking at conferences about how psychological warfare could destroy trust between people who loved each other. Marcus accepted a permanent position as special advisor on financial crimes, with the Federal Bureau of Investigation traveling across the country to help local investigators understand how criminal organizations infiltrated legitimate government operations. His work involved training municipal employees to recognize signs of criminal manipulation, designing new oversight systems that could detect suspicious financial patterns, and providing expert testimony in federal prosecutions of corruption networks. The quantum device that had started his journey was now displayed in the FBI Training Academy as an example of how individual courage and technical innovation could expose even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Jake Morrison's career had been spectacularly rehabilitated through his role in exposing the corruption network, and his Pulitzer Prize-winning coverage of the investigation had established him as one of America's leading experts on political corruption. The Washington Post had hired him as their chief investigative correspondent, and his continuing work on criminal infiltration of democratic institutions had become required reading for law enforcement agencies and political scientists, studying threats to American governance. His documentation of Sophia's psychological manipulation techniques had become a textbook case study in how criminals could exploit emotional vulnerabilities to control public officials. Vincent Castellanos was serving a 12-year federal sentence at a minimum security prison where his cooperation with ongoing investigations had earned him respect from fellow inmates and guards who understood that he had been as much victim as perpetrator. His testimony had been crucial in securing convictions against dozens of other network participants, and his insights into Sophia's manipulation methods had helped federal psychologists develop treatment programs for other officials who had been coerced into criminal behavior. Vincent would never fully recover from the knowledge that his daughter had orchestrated his transformation from idealistic public servant into criminal puppet, but his cooperation had provided some measure of redemption. The international search for Sophia Castellanos had produced leads in 17 countries, but she remained at large, despite a coordinated effort by law enforcement agencies around the world. Federal investigators believed she was attempting to establish new criminal operations in Eastern Europe, where political instability and weak oversight systems provided opportunities for the kind of institutional infiltration she had perfected in America. However, her methods had been documented so thoroughly that potential victims were better prepared to recognize and resist her manipulation techniques. Elena Vasquez was serving 3 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security federal prison, her criminal empire permanently dismantled by prosecutions that had eliminated Los Hermanos as an effective criminal organization. Her cooperation with federal investigators had been limited, but the evidence seized during her arrest had provided crucial intelligence about international money laundering networks that extended far beyond the Chicago operation. Federal agents were using her financial records and communication logs to identify and disrupt similar criminal enterprises in Mexico, Canada, and several European countries. The systemic changes implemented in Chicago as a result of Marcus's evidence had become a model for municipal government reform across the United States, with cities from coast to coast adopting transparency requirements and oversight mechanisms designed to prevent criminal infiltration of public institutions. The real-time financial reporting systems required by the Marcus Thorne Act had already detected suspicious patterns in municipal budgets that led to federal investigations in Phoenix, Seattle, and Miami, preventing the establishment of criminal networks before they could become fully operational. Marcus's work with the FBI had also led to the creation of new victim support programs for public employees who reported corruption and faced retaliation from criminal organizations. The Marcus Thorne Foundation, established with funds recovered from criminal assets, provided legal assistance, financial support, and psychological counseling for whistleblowers and their families who chose to expose criminal activities, despite personal risks. The foundation had already assisted 37 cases involving corporate fraud, environmental crimes, and political corruption, creating a network of support that made it safer for ordinary citizens to stand up against powerful criminal interests. But perhaps the most important legacy of Marcus's courage was the inspiration it provided to other potential whistleblowers who witnessed corruption in their communities and workplaces. His story demonstrated that individual conscience and determination could triumph over institutional corruption and criminal manipulation, even when the odds seemed overwhelming and the personal costs were devastating. The device he had protected during his years of homelessness had become a symbol of hope for anyone who believed that truth and justice could prevail against seemingly impossible challenges. The federal investigation that began with Marcus's evidence had ultimately resulted in over 200 convictions across 17 states, with total criminal asset seizures exceeding $1 billion that were being returned to the municipal budgets and taxpayers who had been victimized by the money laundering operations. The network's dismantling had disrupted drug trafficking, human trafficking, and weapons smuggling operations that extended from Mexico to Canada, demonstrating how municipal corruption could facilitate international criminal enterprises that threatened national security. As I concluded my reporting on this extraordinary story, I reflected on how a chance encounter with a homeless man had led to the exposure of criminal networks that reached into the highest levels of American political and business institutions. Marcus's decision to trust a random journalist with information that could have gotten both of us killed had resulted in one of the most significant law enforcement victories in recent American history. But more importantly, it had proven that democracy could still defend itself against those who sought to corrupt and control it from within. Standing in the congressional hearing room as Marcus completed his testimony, I realized that his journey from homelessness to heroism represented more than just one man's redemption. It embodied the possibility that American institutions could adapt and strengthen themselves against new forms of criminal attack. The small device that had started this entire story had become the foundation for a new era of transparency and accountability that would protect future generations from the kind of criminal infiltration that Sofia Castellanos had almost made permanent. The question Marcus had asked me during our first meeting about whether I believed in the power of truth to overcome corruption had been answered definitively by the events that followed our encounter under Roosevelt Bridge, proving that even the most vulnerable members of society could become heroes when they chose courage over comfort and justice over safety.